Hi, we've just finished with admin views and we now would like to start looking at advanced field types. Now there are a few advanced field types and the one that is most advanced is the one called custom field type. So I'm going to sort this here by custom fields. It's that one. And you see at this moment we have quite a few custom fields in place. Now let's look at two of those. One is the local file list and the other one is let's do a sermon one, but let's first look at the local file list. You'd see that basically from there all the way down to there is simply PHP. So I'm creating a view which is most basically taking information, if you know PHP, from the global settings of your component. So there needs to be a field with a name local folder in your global settings. We'll still look at how to set up global settings when we get to component. And if it hasn't got a setting, it falls back onto the image, which is in the JPath root. For your component, this will be replaced with your component name, and it puts it into local folder. And then I just start the options, and the options array, which we're going to return. And the first thing I add to it is please select a file. Add files. Oh yes, if there isn't files, it will say please add files to, and it'll give the local folder name. If there is files, we're going to update those then over here. So first we bring in the file system or classes from Joomla. Then we basically check whether that folder exists, and if it doesn't exist, we create it. Okay, that's just in the field type. Now once it's created, and if it exists, it obviously skips this, it doesn't go in there, and it just starts by grabbing all the files and from that folder and place it into files, and then starts up an array where it loops the files and puts it into options. And by doing that, we are basically, let me just check here to make sure. Yeah, we are adding the file name and the file name to our options array and then returning the options array. So you can add your own custom PHP scripting in when you extend the list view. So the list field, we are extending the list field, so it's just going to be a drop down list of all the files in that specific folder, either images or the folder that was set globally in local folder. Okay, so that's just setting up a folder. Now there is a field type called file list, I think. Yeah, there it is. The reason why I didn't use file list is because file list has a static directory to where you need to add the files so that you can view them, and we wanted to have it be able to rename the file folder, the folder for the files, for the media, to anything, and then have it update itself automatically. So that's why we then created a custom field where we extended the list type. And let me just refresh this and get that detail back. So we chose a custom field, and then we just extend the list type, and we don't want it to have a add new button because it won't work, it will just break. And we don't want them to select multiple. Oh yes, we are allowing them to select multiple. Now since we are using multiple, we need to go back and make sure that we are storing it as a JSON. So the JSON is when you have multiple or arrays, any kind of arrays in a value, you need to store it as a JSON. And the component builder itself will check if it is a multiple selection is true, it will automatically store it in a JSON object even if you forgot to select this. So we have got some things in place to sort of ensure that the system sort of behaves as expected. Okay, let me see. That's just a quick view on doing a local file, custom field as a local file. Now, which I'm sure all of you have been waiting for, is let's look at how to create a sermon preacher custom field. So basically it's a preacher custom field. So what is this field going to do? It's going to show a list of preachers, but it is going to basically display the preachers that are set up in the preacher list view. Okay, so let's open that. So let's see. The convention is that you would call the type preachers, that's the list view name, but you would call the name, you would use the same as the editing name, which is preacher without the S. So if you go back to your admin views, you would use this name as the name of the field, but you would use that name as the type. You see, because you're now creating a custom type, and the logic behind it is it's going to show a list of preachers, but you're going to select just one preacher. Okay, so that's just the logic. The label, you can really put whatever you like, whatever is descriptive enough for your user to understand. And then there's a place for adding a description. Then here we have set multiple to false. We want them to only be able to select one preacher at a time. Default 0. These are all basically left to their default values. And extending list is the most common custom field that we have. If you want to see the list of custom fields that is available, you can go up here to extend, and you see that list, radio, and checkboxes are available. I think I should update that to also say users. The user, there's also a user option to extend users. If you want to see if what is available, then look at that name, which is JForm field, and go to Component Builder. Go to the backend of Component Builder, so that would be Administrator, Components, Component Builder. Then go to Compiler, that's a folder. Then go to Joomla 3, which is the current version we are targeting, and then search for that JForm. There it is, JForm. So the ones that are available to extend, let's see, is the user, JForm field user. It must say JForm field. So it's JForm field user, JForm field radio, JForm field list, and JForm field checkboxes. Now this also means if there is a form field you want to extend that doesn't exist already, in our advanced seminar we'll show you how to add your own form fields here. There's basically two places you'll need to change, which I could tell you now. One of them would be to add the field and update it accordingly, and the other one would be to add it in a few places in the code, and also in a JSON file called settings there. So those are some of the things we will deal with in advanced adaptation of Component Builder. We will still set up that series very soon. It's not finished yet though. Okay, getting back to extending list field, you would add simply their list. Okay, so then there's also a few conventions. One of them being that if you are going to be targeting, like in this example, we are targeting the preachers, you will be using the preachers table as the table that is being targeted. So the question to ask is, where is the data going to be found? And that is the table that needs to be added. In which component is it going to be found? And that is what needs to be added by component. Now, the reason why we have this hash 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 component here is because it's a placeholder which component builder will replace with the component's code name once it's built. It's a feature we added because sometimes we want to rename components, and if you had statically added the actual component name there, then you have to in every field go and update that name, and in every view go and update that name, and you know, everywhere where you've actually statically added the component's name, you will need to update it. But to explain to you exactly what the system is doing, I can go to components, open Sermon distributor, and then take the name in code like that, copy, and see that it's an underscore C. If it was an uppercase, sorry, not underscore, lowercase, if it was an uppercase like that, it would mean that you have to place the component name as well with an uppercase. Lowercase, so you would just do a, this is a lowercase, so we just do an S lowercase. So that is actually what the system is doing. It actually is just replacing these placeholders with the actual component name on the fly. So using the placeholders basically saves you time in the long run from making changes everywhere if you change the component's name, which is quite normal to do. Very often you start with a component and you think of calling it something, and then later you realize, oh, that name is actually being used in the Joomla repository, and you need to choose another name. And to do that is going to affect the whole component, and so we added this placeholder structure which would make that less painful, at least. And anywhere in all the code, custom coding that you're adding, and you need to use the component's name, you can simply use this hashtag format of replacement. In some areas you would need to use these brackets like that, but most of the time it will work either way. The best measure to ensure is to try it with the hashes first, and if you go into the code and you see it didn't replace it, then you know it's the angle brackets that needs to be used. Anyway, so in this case we are using these characters and then the view, again, that is the single variable of the view. So if we were to close this and go to the view, which would be then preacher, all lowercase, is what you would be adding here. Make sure that it's always lowercase. And then the list view, or the views plural, would be that value there, all lowercase as well. And then the value field is the field that the user will see. So that is what is visible in the UI, user interface. The key field is the value that will be stored in the database. Now these fields relate to this table. So inside this table, what field do you want the user to see? Now that would be the name of the preacher. And inside this table, what field would you want to store in the other database? Because we are looking into preacher, but we're going to store it wherever this field is being used, right? So that would be the ID. And the column name in that database of that view where this field will be used will be called preacher. So to show that to you in the database itself, you can open it there and scroll down to Sermon distributor, open sermons, click on structure, and here in the back end, let's close this, go to sermons, new, and we'll see that there is a place for preacher. If I was to look with Firebug at it, we'll see that it is basically, the name is preacher, and remember we spoke about this J form underscore as the ID, but it actually is simply the preacher field, which is being stored directly in the database in the preacher column of the table, and it's stored as an integer 11, and that was set up here, right? Integer 11, and we say that it is a key, so we can target it. So here at the bottom, if we look at indexes, we'll see that it has actually added it as a key. There we go. Okay, so that all is done right here in the database structure, and then in this area here. Now again, in this part which you can add your own custom PHP, the fact that I'm using 19, 18, 17, it's just sort of creating line breaks and spacing and tabs for me dynamically. I could have placed them all just under PHP 1 without this quotation, is that quotation? Yes, quotation marks. You know, wrapping around them all like we just did with the file folder ListView example we did previously. Just a note, inside of this code you cannot use these quotation marks. You need to use single quotes. Unfortunately at this stage it is not able to accommodate your, even if you try to do an escape, it will not behave as you might expect. So my apologies for that. At this stage you can only do single quotes between these two quotations, double quotes. Okay, so that is adding a custom field, which is a little bit more advanced. If you know PHP, you will know exactly what's happening here. Again, these placeholders reflect back to these values here. So basically a.id will be written there, and the text value, which is the field value, is going to be called a.name, and then id and code text. This code is built up by the view that we are in and the text. So this would read sermon preacher in the code. In fact, I can go show you how it looks when it builds it. Let's quickly look at that. So to show you where it starts, let's open that field list. So this is what it starts with. Basically it replaces this placeholder with your code, okay, and it replaces all these features up here as well and updates that, and so everywhere you see these things, it's going to be updated through Component Builder. And obviously everything up here will be replaced with your licensing tags. Okay, so that's a look at that. But then now let's look at the finished product. Sermon, it's placed on the modules fields, and there it is, preachers. Open it, you see that it added preacher there, and in the input it added, and it also shows you where, if you had tripped that switch like we've explained to show the line numbers in your component, it shows you in what file. Now these files are found under the, if you go to Component Builder, under under helpers compiler. They are these files that is being used to compile your component. I'll possibly, when we go to the advanced section, I'll go much more in depth in regards to these files. For now, we're just trying to get across how to build a component, not to extend Component Builder itself as yet. But at least here you can see where in the code it is actually building this, compiling this and putting it together. And remember we talked about it getting the structure. Let's go down. Okay, so this is used for the button. This is to generate a new button. When you can click on new, basically that is the button there. This area from there to there is generating the button. This is what controls whether the button should show up or whether it shouldn't, and even if it is to be set at all. Okay, so this is basically what generates the button, this area. This area here, the get options, you see we said that it will show name and it will show ID. And so if you go back to our structure here, it basically dynamically replaces these with those. The reason for it is it's actually done a few times, and I felt like, okay, let's make it that you only need to update these values, and then it gets updated all over in the bottom of the code, and it makes it just much more easy to change your custom fields. So it built a field called preacher name, which again it uses here as a object value, because it retrieves an object from the database and it looks if that object exists. It actually iterates it and builds up your option list, which is returned to use in the drop down. So it dynamically generates your list. And so Component Builder, through that infrastructure that I've just explained here, actually compiles all of that code for you and puts it in the right file, in the right place, and all of that. And obviously, once you've built a component and you know where you have made those changes in Component Builder, you can go look at those files. If you know how to build a Joomla website, I've used the same conventions as the core in regards to implementation of your files and so forth. Okay. At the moment we are only pulling values that are published. This is what that is all about. That is the custom fields. I feel like I am maybe just mumbling on without purpose, so let's get out of this one. I think we can quickly look at this one, which is this manual file list Dropbox. This one is much more advanced. What we are dealing with here is a file that actually is stored. If I look here, let's see. So what I did is I created a function in my component global helper function called get Dropbox links. It tells him that it wants manual links, and it passes a specific variable to, and it would return a bunch of links, and those links it will check if it exists, check the array, not only that it is an array, but it actually has values in it, and if it does, it actually just packs it into the options and gives it over to the options array, to the list. Now this part here means that you can, in your custom field types, you can add a helper static method call. If you know what those two symbols there mean, it means it's a static method being called from a class. Now this class is something that if you know the Joomla API and know how to build a component, you'll know that you can add to any component what is known as a component helper class. Now if I was to go to Summon Distributor, the component helper class is always located in the helper folder of the admin as well as the site view. The admin is then in the backend, which is administrator components, and then there is the component, and there is its helper folder. And in the front end you have the same convention: component, Summon Distributor, and there's the helper structure. Okay, and here is some of the script that which Summon Distributor structures through its helper structure. Okay, so there is the helper file for the front, and here is the helper file for the back. Now, to add methods to the already helper files, now if you don't want to know what all the custom helpers is that we ship with all components, you can open Component Builder, you can go to the compiler, not controller, go to Joomla 3 and then look for the helper file and the site helper file. If you open it, you'd see a whole lot of helper methods, obviously with a lot of placeholders, which we will customize for each component so that it targets that component and so forth. And you would see there's a JSON to string method here, there's a get vars, there's a get var singular. This is just to get one variable from the database, so you don't need to always write this whole string to get just one variable. You can actually come and look at how this works and use this to get a variable from the database. We also have is published to check if a specific object is published, and get actions. But again, this is way beyond the scope of just looking at custom fields. We will go into great depth into all the features of the helper structures and that when we deal with advanced concepts. But I'm just giving you a heads up so at least you can start looking at it and possibly get yourself going. I wrote these functions: check object, check array, check string, check JSON, shorten, merge arrays, save string, and escape HTML, replace numbers. This one I'm using quite often. You know, if you basically do save string, we change every number in the string immediately to text, so that you can be sure whatever you get back from save string doesn't have numbers in it. This is sometimes quite necessary, in fact all the time actually. It's especially if you don't know if there might be a number, that the first character might be a number. This way we are ensuring that, you know, it always isn't, it's actually text. Okay, so there's just a whole bunch of custom methods that we ship with all components that are developed. So if you were to open, like I've said, Sermon Distributors helper class, you'd see that these helper classes are now all showing up here. Get actions, shorten string, merge array. So you can come, and if any of you feel that the methods that I've used here is archaic or outdated, please go on the forums at GitHub and talk with me about it, and I'll very gladly look at it and see. I know I recently tried to improve on this check string by doing that, so I could actually dump this part and sort of save on the query. But for some strange reason, this started causing problems all over, and strings that were strings were being returned as not being strings. So I was happening. But what I can tell you is that I obviously went back to the old school way of doing it, which is this way. I don't know, there might be an easier way. Obviously we first want to ensure that it's set, that actually this value is set, and then it's a string, and then it actually has a length. You see, something can be a string and yet don't have a length. I might be wrong on that, and yet this is what I've found. I've only been coding in PHP for 3 years now, so I'm definitely, you can teach me a few things if you've been at it longer than I am. Okay, back to the UI. That is where I get these values. So showing it to you in here, I could go up a bit. It says get Dropbox links, you see. Now we see that it has this thing of return, which is set to false. Now that means if I only was to say that it should return the manual values, then it will only return the manual links. But since I've set it to 2, it will actually return all of those links and not just one of them. Okay, so because you can actually target that it returns only one specific sermon's link. So this method is quite dynamic, and that's all that I'm calling in this advanced field type, which is called custom field, and it gives me a link of all the an array of all the links, which I then just load like I've explained. Okay, so that is, again, as you can see, quite an advanced implementation of this custom fields. And obviously, as I hope you would realize, is that you really can do anything. You can, with that list concept, you can even grab a bunch of website names from somewhere. You can put any PHP in there and build a list, which can be used to save to the database. Okay, let's see, that would be the custom fields. There's also one called custom user. Now the custom user, at the moment it doesn't look like I have any in the demo data for you. So I'll just click on new and then select custom user. And you'd see that the custom user, basically you don't need to set or change anything from here to there. All of those should actually just work. The only part that you might want to consider removing would be the PHP, this part here. Basically what this part does is it limits the user list to only a certain group. That means, again, you need to set up a global value in your component field. In your now global, remember we talked about that previously, is basically the options button. If you click on options, it opens a place which you set global. These are all global values. This is an area for global values. Now you can get hold of those global values through the component helper get params with the component name and get, when there you would place the field name. So that's how you can get a value from your global settings. And basically I'm getting a specific group's value and placing it in here, and then I am returning that group. That's all this part is doing. In fact, those two sections are actually independent. So this one is what helps you set, okay, I want to just return a specific group. This part helps you set any users you want to exclude. Now this specific feature here ensures that only one record per user is set. So let's say a user has already been added to a previous record, then that user should not show up again. It should be removed from the list. So this is what this PHP is doing. It's simply looking to this current view and checking if there is users and getting their IDs and then setting them up in the correct manner that they are unique, and then returns them. So those are the users that already have so if you're building something which are supposed to have student details, for example, you don't want a student to have more than one entry in that table, right? You want every student to just have one entry. And so if a student already is selected, you wouldn't want them to be selected again. That's what this exclude feature actually does. Now to show that to you in the code, let's go to another project that I'm working on called Learning Manager and Modules, and they have a field called Student. Here we go, Student Users and User. Now there are two kinds of ways to do this. One is to not allow more than one user to have an entry, and then you would basically, so let me open both. The one is saying, okay, exclude users that already have been used. So that means if a user has been selected, that whole thing that I've just explained. The other one actually returns null, which means it will always show all users. And the way to have it set this to null would be simply to remove that part of your of the code. Then it will automatically set this value to null. Component builder will do that. Now when it gets about the group part, it's the same principle. If you don't want it to just show a specific group, you can actually it will also be set to null, like that. And Joomla will component builder will do that, and all you need to do is simply remove this part of the code, and then it will actually do that. And so that is to target a specific group, and also to target a or to remove specific users. So let's say that you want to remove users that belongs to other table or other structure. Then all that PHP that you need to write, you can place under the type PHP X. So you could do like that. Type PHP X1 equals, and then all your PHP can be placed in here for excluding. And for the group, it's simply not directly one, it must have an underscore. You can just take that one basically. That one. And this one will be used for the groups, and it actually says it there. See? Get exclude method, PHP for the get group method. And in the code, which is stored under fields and models, you see what it will do. So you can do things and then come and look, what did component builder build? How does it look? And then you can actually go to the view like we have here and see, does it actually work? Is the preacher showing up? And then you can use Firebug like that, and you can look, okay, so that one is of the index. Let me see. So you would use that, and then here is a select list. You see it there? It's a little hidden. And here you have the values. So that's the ID, and that is the actual name of the speaker, and the ID and the name. And so that is how it should display the data. And component builder sets up the XML structure that Joomla uses to build this. Actually, this Joomla is building this whole structure for you. So even this nice button and everything is Joomla's actually handiwork. It is doing that for you, and this is all done through these XML input values that you're adding here. So you would change the type to, you might say staff members. Oh yes, there is something to remember here. The type names may not have underscores or any spaces in them. In fact, anything that is not translatable usually needs to be, not have any underscores. Not have any spaces. So you can't do this. It will just not work. So you must remove the underscore. You can do that, but that sort of, I think it will be made lowercase anyway. So you could just do that instead, and then it will work, because that is used not only in the file database, but it's also used in the name convention and everywhere, this file type. So as you can see in here, that file type is called student users, and even the file is called that, and here it is called student user, and here it is called student user, and this one, it's with the S, and that one is with the S, and the file also is with an S. So you can see that that specific name type name is used everywhere, and you cannot have underscores in this class name, and neither in this type name. Maybe you can, but so far my experience is that it doesn't work if you do have it. So for some reason it just doesn't work. Okay, so that's just a heads up on the naming of this type. And so you can update these fields. They are mostly fields that are sort of related to all the other fields, but this one specifically says extends user. Okay, so it actually shows you how it's going to extend it. So if you removed all the PHP, then this field as it is now would show all the users every time. Okay, so let me just close out here. That is looking at the advanced field type called user, custom user. Another one we need to look at is the repeatable fields. Repeatable fields is actually not that difficult, but you need to understand how it's sort of structured. You need to first create the fields that you want to repeat inside of repeatable fields. The way a repeatable field structure looks in Joomla, I mean when we look at it in the actual application, let me see, where did I use repeatable field? Okay, here we have one. So this, from there all the way to there, is one repeatable field. And if you know a little XML and you've worked with repeatable fields, you'll see that here is the fields that are being repeated, okay, inside of the repeatable field. So basically a repeatable field is a field type that has other fields inside of it. Now you don't need to write any of this. The way you would structure a repeatable field is actually very, very simple. You first create the fields that you want to repeat, and do realize you can't use repeatable fields in repeatable fields, but you can use custom advanced fields in repeatable fields. So if you look at that, we have here again, you see there's a field type called cause and risks. Now if you know Joomla, you'll know there is no such field type, cause and risks. So that means this is a custom field. So if I were to go to fields, we would see that there is a field called here cause and risks, and it basically gets that information from this database table. This is another component that I've done with Component Builder, and it is displaying those data, also making some model changes to the data and adding some style to it, non-breaking space and stuff like that. Okay, so that is just dealing with the cause and risks. So looking again at our repeatable field, you're able to add an advanced custom field inside of it. But what you need to add it is, let's open females for our example, is you need to have the field ID, and you need to order it according to the order you want it displayed in the line where you do repeatable fields. So if we close here and then we go back to creating a new admin view and I click on fields, you see that there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 fields in one row. And if I click next, they all appear again. And if I click next, they all appear again. And that's what repeatable fields really is about. Now this structure, these fields, if we were to look at it, how did I develop this specific pop-up repeatable structure? Well, I can show that to you. So here's a list of all the repeatable fields that I've already built. There's 3 pages of 20. If we were to click on add files, no wait, we were looking at add fields. Let's see, add fields. There it is, add fields for views. I'll open that. So this is the repeatable field for adding fields for views. And all you see here is I'm saying, okay, you can add 800 fields. This is way overkill, but okay. And we're calling the button add. So if we go back to the view, you see it says add. And then I'm adding an ID and a class to it, a description, which if we were to hover over it, here it has a little setup field for this view, which is the description. Same there, see? And the label is fields, so it says there fields. And then the icon is list. Now the icon is what is shown in the button. That is a list. All the custom Joomla icons are can be used. To know these icons, you should go to, let me see, there's the URL, docs.joomla.org/j3.x Joomla standard icon fonts. There we go. That is the URL, and you'll get to this page, and these are all the available icons, and you'll basically use that part, or this part. So if I wanted to do checkmark circle, and to go copy checkmark circle, and I would in here simply the icon, change that to checkmark circle. Okay, so that's how you change the icon. And then these are simply the IDs of the fields I want inside of the repeatable field. Okay, and so if I was to show you where to get the ID, it simply would be close your repeatable field, and you'd see the IDs next to the fields there on the right. So you would create the repeatable fields that you the fields that you want to use in the repeatable field, and you would get a list of those IDs jotted down, say maybe somewhere in Notepad or something. Just add them in the order that you want them to be added, and then inside of your repeatable field, you would simply paste it in the fields area with a comma separating them, and then a component builder will dynamically construct this whole structure for you and add it to your component. I think it's really stunning, and I hope you enjoy using the repeatable field structure. I know it's a little buggy still, and there's a lot of talk about it not being as stable, but your normal basic fields like text fields and radio buttons and so forth, they all work well. Now the only thing about the radio buttons that you use in the repeatable fields, you need to remove the class of your radio button. So it cannot be a button, it must be a dot. Unfortunately, they don't yet make it possible to actually load the button. Now what's the difference? Well, the difference is, let me see if I can quickly show you. That is the button version of a radio button, okay, and that is the dot version of the radio button, and it doesn't look like a button. And so in your repeatable fields, you cannot use the button version. It needs to be this one. And what makes it a button is obviously the class that is being added to the field. So you need to remove the class values from your radio button if it's going to be used in a repeatable field. But anyway, if you forgot to do that and you compile your component, and now you're looking at the repeatable field, you'll see that the radio button is, that it's not working, that it's messed up. Until they possibly fix it, this is unfortunately the case. Okay, that is looking at advanced fields called custom fields, custom user fields, as well as repeatable fields. These are really the advanced field types that there are. The other thing that I want to briefly mention, let me see how long have we already been at this. Okay, I see this is getting a little long, so let's move what I wanted to share to a later topic. Thank you for watching.